Hey everyone, this is our Social Problems Lecture 4.1, Gender Inequality. So, in this lecture, we're going to talk about basic definitions surrounding gender. We're going to talk about an idea called the gender spectrum. We will talk about gender inequality, what exactly patriarchy is, and also sexual violence. In terms of content warnings, this one can get pretty grim. We're talking about sexual violence, including sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. This lecture specifically is talking about relationships between men and women in general. The next series of lectures will be talking more about LGBTQ plus and gay rights and that whole world. These two topics are definitely interrelated with each other, but they do deserve their own units. That's why I separated it up into 2 weeks. So, basic definitions. The terms sex and gender are commonly used as synonyms in our society. However, social scientists point out that they are actually quite different. The term sex refers to the anatomical and other biological differences between females and males that are determined at the moment of conception and developed in the womb throughout childhood and adolescence. So it happens when sperm meets egg, the genetic code is established. Once the embryo turns into a fetus and develops in the womb, that also sets into place certain components of sex. Once the child is born, then continued sexual development occurs, and then the final stage, if you will, into adulthood occurs to us in adolescence. Examples of sex are male, female, and also intersex individuals. We will define intersex individuals as somebody who was born somewhere between male and female biologically. And that absolutely exists. That's not a sexuality. That is just the biological condition of an individual's bodies. And that can include a range of medical conditions. There are quite a number of medical conditions that make intersex individuals. Gender, then, as opposed to sex, is the social and cultural differences a society assigns into people based on biological sex. Traditionally, most societies break up into broad camps, male and female, in terms of social expectations of individuals. Some societies, including certain Native American cultures, including some Indonesia and India, and I know there are others, they have what are called third sexes, and that is also part of the cultural construct that is gender in those societies. There are two anatomical components regarding sex. We have primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics. This is probably a slight review for most of you from high school health class. Primary sex characteristics are the anatomical and other biological differences between females and males that begin developing in the womb. So we're really talking about the appearance of genitalia and also slight size differences, but primarily genetic makeup. Secondary sex characteristics, then, are those anatomical and other biological differences between females and males that emerge during puberty. So that's really where we see size differences between males and females, with males being taller. That's when we see development of breasts, changes in genitalia, etc. You did, as I just said, you probably learned about these in health class when you were younger, but it's very important in understanding that these issues are related to both transgender people and intersex people as well. If you are not firmly established in either male or female biological categories, then what exactly happens with primary sex characteristics and what exactly happens with secondary sex characteristics and how those can do things that are not typical That's a big part to play in what it means to be transgender and what it means to be intersex. We will explore both of those in the next lecture. But now let's talk about this concept called the gender spectrum. So, we define gender as the social and cultural differences people assign based on biological sex. Feminist scholars have posited that very much like conditions like autism, gender is actually on a spectrum as well. So they make the argument that the range of gendered behavior we do every day is on this gender spectrum, and each of us has our individual gender spectrum based on our individual gender identities. So you may do male or female or another gender in some way, and then I do masculinity kind of in my way and within my scope of gendered behaviors. And in the modern era, in societies, in most of mainstream society in the United States, each of us does male, female, and neutral gendered behaviors each day. So for example, I'm not currently teaching in person. That's going to happen in a few weeks. But when I do drive to work, I often will scream and swear and say things to myself in traffic, and that's a pretty stereotypical male kind of thing, or at least expected more of men. I will eat my lunch at work. That is a gender neutral behavior. That is just like something the way everyone else would do it. I usually am the first one to get home, so I cook dinner. In traditional gender roles, that is more of a female-oriented role. And then I also, as part of our nightly procedure, it's my job to help my youngest daughter brush her teeth, and she's actually made me quite good at flossing. So that could maybe traditionally, that kind of childcare, direct childcare, could be considered a traditionally female gender role. Some scholars, most particularly feminist scholars that study gender and the way we behave in gendered ways, call this doing gendering, or I've seen a couple times it's doing gender, or sometimes I see gendering. It's a very interesting concept. So, I'm sorry, So this breaks out that previous slide in terms of gender roles and separating that out. Namely, our gender roles often are expected of people based on their gender or perceived gender. I swear and I scream in traffic. That reflects the expectation of men that men are aggressive. However, I also do cook dinner. That is of the expectation that women care for children. I help my youngest daughter brush her teeth. Again, the expectation women care for children. Each of us, even if we are hyper-masculine or hyper-feminine, we do tend to do things that do not match our classical gender identity during the day. Very, very few people are strictly, I only do male things or I only do female things. And those people even, they would be outliers in that they don't do the other things. So, we learn about how to do our gender roles through what is called gender role socialization. The definition there being the process whereby individuals learn the culture of society. That's the definition of socialization. When we do socialization in terms of gender roles, then we are learning how we do gender through our life course. It should be noted that gender role socialization starts before birth and continues through the life course. So obviously, the fetus cannot learn how to be gendered, right? That's not part of biological development, and even they may not be able to, once a child is born, for that first couple weeks, other things are turning on. They're not really learning gender, but we start doing to them that stuff at birth and sometimes before birth. If you've ever been to a baby shower of a child that's anticipated to be female, you absolutely see all this pink, the pinkest thing you've ever seen, right? That is treating the anticipated child as if they are female in what's called anticipatory socialization, which is also it's anticipatory because we're expecting a girl, and it is also gender role socialization. Gender identity, then, is the individual's perception of themselves as being female, male, or another gender identity. And terms we can use surrounding gender identity include femininity, which is cultural expectations of girls and women. Examples of those include gentleness and attractiveness for females. Masculinity, cultural expectations of boys and men, including toughness and bravery. And then individuals who are androgynous, which can mean containing aspects of both femaleness and maleness, or both, or neither. That third option. We will talk more about gender identity again in next week's lecture when we talk more about transgender individuals. So let's talk about this concept of patriarchy, because this patriarchy is a concept that's fundamental to feminist scholarship, and this is one of the words that I think is often taken for granted in the academic literature that is never actually defined, and I want you to actually understand what all this stuff is about. So, our society is a patriarchy, the definition there being a society in which men have a disproportionate amount of power and resources than people of other sexes. This ties in to a concept known as male privilege, which are the advantage a male enjoys just because he is male. That ties in with our conversations of privilege that we've been having throughout the whole course. This time it's just associated with being a guy. It should be noted that our society is not a formal patriarchy. It's not. The dominance of men over women is rarely laid out in official rules in our society. Some societies are officially, legally patriarchal. Those societies are almost exclusively, not entirely, historical. If you are someone either of Jewish faith or Christian faith, and also to a degree Muslim faith, in the Old Testament and Torah, there are stories of patriarchs and those patriarchy government structures. That is official patriarchy. Our society has unofficial patriarchy. Anything else there? A example of male privilege just popped into my head as I was talking about this. I enjoy a certain degree of male privilege as a male teacher, that I will tell you things and you are more likely to believe me than a lot of my female counterparts. I talk to my female coworkers, and they tell me a lot of times that, yeah, I'm teaching this topic and I get a lot of resistance. I get a lot of people questioning my authority, says my female friends, because they just assume I don't know what I'm talking about. That kind of layer of authority that our society tends to give men is something that I enjoy, right? That's part of my male privilege. Hegemonic masculinity, then, is the culturally constructed concept of the perfect man or the so-called real man. This concept includes behaviors such as being able to fight and shooting guns, depending on where you are in the country. It includes being a smart, savvy, handsome businessman. But it can also include a certain degree of sportiness, athleticism, and ability to throw a spiral football, right? All of these components are elements of hegemonic, perfect, real male masculinity. In and of itself, that type of individual is not inherently problematic. I know a few guys that are good dudes and they're also hegemonically masculine. However, the problem here is that idea of the real man. Because if that man is the real man, it thus excludes all other types of males as being inherently inferior and less than a man. And what does that mean, etc. Toxic masculinity, then, are behaviors that are socially acceptable when exhibited by men, but are actually physically or socially harmful. So this is stuff that guys do that could potentially hurt their health, or maybe hurt their emotional relationships or their psychological well-being, etc. It should be noted that hegemonic masculinity is often toxic masculinity, but it is not always toxic masculinity. Examples of toxic masculinity include an old man who refuses to go to the doctor. This is very, very common. Old men who are sick, who their whole lives have told themselves to tough it out, and their inability to take help in that way. That could be dangerous, especially as people get older. Competitive drinking or shots competitions or whatever, that is something that men are more likely to do than women. And that's not to say that women don't also drink in competitive ways, but it's more masculine, if you will. Fighting, especially among teenage males fighting over girls, right? You don't often hear about teenage women fighting with each other over guys. Sometimes you do, but you're more likely to hear it about guys. And then the inability of men to form meaningful emotional relationships with each other. That is also part of toxic masculinity. That is something personally that I have problems with. I have a hard time forming relationships with other men, especially men my age. Most of my friends, my close friends, are female. That is an issue I have in my life, and that is an example of toxic masculinity that I have in my own life. Like racism, sex discrimination occurs on both the individual and institutional level. So just like that bit that we talked about when we were talking about race and ethnicity. Scholars have identified a number of phenomena related to institutional sex segregation, including, well, sex segregation itself, we'll talk about that in a second, comparable worth, this phenomena known as the glass ceiling, and also a similar phenomena known as the glass escalator. And we'll look at each of those individually. So to define the thing itself, sex segregation is the concentration of women in certain low-paying clerical and service-type jobs. These are professions that are disproportionately filled by women, and sometimes these are called pink-collar jobs. That is kind of an older idea. In the modern vocabulary, we typically refer to this phenomena as sex segregation. These types of jobs may include childcare, medical assistants, teaching assistants, and also teachers in general, social workers, bank tellers, restaurant wait staff, hairdressers, etc. All of these groups, yeah, sure, there are men who do some of these jobs, but the overwhelming number of them are actually women. And this is actually in our society's general, in conflict with our society's value of comparable worth. In our society, we at least say that men and women's jobs should pay roughly equal value, and men should make about as much as women do. However, when you look at the reality of the matter, it continues that women earn about 80 cents for each dollar that a man earns. Women earn 80% of that, which over a lifetime of dollars is quite a dramatic amount of money. So even though most people do not think that sex segregation is right, it continues in our society. If you are especially steeped in sociological theory, we would call the fact that sex segregation exists as the real type in our society, and then thinking that it shouldn't exist, that is the ideal type, to put that in Weberian terms. But if you don't know what I'm talking about there, it doesn't matter. So we have another phenomena happening here of the glass ceiling. This is an invisible barrier. Excuse me. This is an invisible barrier facing women as they try to advance in the workplace. So the glass ceiling is a mechanic of sex segregation. This is how the phenomena actually works. An example of this could be that Juan and Stacy both start jobs at an insurance company doing their work at the same time. They're hired and they're onboarded, and they start their job at exactly the same time. Both Juan and Stacy do the same quality of work and the same amount of work, right? However, after a year, Juan is promoted to be manager, and the official reason for that is that he, quote, shows potential, right? And it should be noted that in the United States, qualifications for promotion are left to individual businesses. They're, in general, in our workplaces, the manager decides who has potential and who doesn't have potential. And a lot of that is tied in with who puts in the most work, who goes out after hours and pals around with the boss at drinking or whatever, who dedicates themselves to the work more. Well, the reality of the matter is women have greater expectations at home due to how our society is structured. So when women don't do all that extracurricular stuff, right, when women are unable, because of their expectations at home, to show that extra assertiveness, then they do not get promoted in that way. That is the mechanic of the glass ceiling. And that's why in most organizations, especially for-profit companies, you see a whole lot of women employed by the organization, but as the hierarchy goes up, there's fewer and fewer women. This is related to a similar concept known as the glass escalator. This is a similar phenomena, but it has a different effect. The glass escalator is the smooth path afforded men in promotion in the workplace, especially in occupations that are primarily filled by women. So this is most typical in careers with high degrees of sex segregation. So you have a occupation or a workplace that is predominantly women, and then a man comes in to also do that job, right? So our example here being Derek is the only man working as a nurse in the emergency department, or the ER, whatever we want to call it. Derek frequently volunteers to work overtime and rarely calls off when his kids are sick because his wife is a stay-at-home mom. So Derek is able to put everything into the job itself. Management then notices Derek's quote-unquote dedication in comparison to his coworkers and therefore promote him, and get that then, by the structure of the expectations of men and women in our society, gives Derek that added advantage of his fellow coworkers. That is an example of the glass escalator phenomenon. Now let's talk some about sexual violence, and some of this content is kind of rough. Generally speaking, if a behavior is physically possible, it will occur in most societies. And what determines the commonality of that behavior is largely dependent on the culture in that society. Most of the sexual violence that occurs in our society is made possible by what scholars call rape culture. Our society is not the only one that has a rape culture. Thinking about it, I would say probably most societies have an element of rape culture, but our society definitely does have one. The definition there being that there are cultural understandings that encourage us to see women as objects. We blame rape victims. We say she shouldn't have done that. We excuse rapists. Well, he made a bad decision, and overlook other acts of sexual violence as, you know, boys just being boys. Now, with that said, we have come a tremendous way in the last 50 years, but there still are elements of this in our society. This is what created and what continues to fuel movements like the Me Too movement, right? This continued elements of really dangerous sexual behavior and sexual attitudes. It's really attitudes and understanding of how sex should and shouldn't work in our society, and who is and is not entitled to sex. Those are elements of rape culture. Sexual assault, then, is defined as any unwanted sexual contact. This includes, but is not limited to, groping, kissing, petting, touching, or sexual penetration. By this definition, rape is a form of sexual assault, but not all sexual assault is rape. The official FBI definition of rape as of the year 2012 is penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without consent of the victim. This is a pretty good definition of rape. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. People of any sex or gender, it should be highlighted, can be or could be the victim of rape or sexual assault. It's a common misconception that men can't be raped. That is total bunk. Men absolutely can be raped because by this definition, it is really unwanted sexual contact and with somebody's genitals, or to put lack of a better word, going inside of someone, right? So by that definition, any human being could be sexually assaulted. Sexual harassment, then, is unwelcome sexual advances requisite for sexual favors. So saying, I'll do this for you, but you have to do this sex thing to me. Or physical conducts of sexual nature that is used as a condition of employment or promotion, or that interfere with an individual's job performance and creates an intimidating or hostile work environment. Sexual harassment may or may not include sexual assault. There doesn't have to be any physical component of something for it to be sexual harassment. It may or it may not occur in a workplace. You can be sexually harassed at a place that you don't work in, right? And like affirmative action policies, unfortunately, workplace sexual harassment policies are often unpopular among many people because of clumsy training and clumsy execution. I am an educator in this regard, and even I have seen sexual harassment trainings that are really dumb and really ineffective. You have to be a tremendous amount of skill and a tremendous amount of nuance has to go into actually talking about sexual harassment, talking about sexual violence, to really get across what the thing really is, right? To convey to someone that, yes, a pat on the butt or unwanted rubbing of shoulders, that also is sexual assault. Because any contact with another person that you do not want is assault, right? And if it becomes sexual, it is then sexual assault. And comments about your body, comments that, hey, you look good in that dress. Well, if you like the comment that you look good in that dress, I guess that's good. But if you don't want that comment, that becomes sexual harassment. The person that is receiving the assault or the comment or whatever, that is the person that defines whether it is or is not harassment or assault, right? That's what it comes down to. Just like individual discrimination and institutional discrimination, it doesn't matter what the individual is trying to do, it still is the thing. It doesn't matter if I am trying to kill you, if what I do actually causes your death, it is still murder to a certain degree. But it's not a perfect analogy, but it gets the point across. Okay, that is the end of this lecture. Again, big ideas here. If you have any questions about any of these topics, please let me know, and I would be glad to email you about it. Okay, talk to you later.